Well, again, good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday to you all. And we are proud to welcome you to today's Zoom call of the Environment Committee. The aim of this meeting is to have dialogue with all of you to help inform all of us on the next steps of the Climate Action Plan rollout so that myself, my colleagues and friends, Edith and Cheryl and Ryan and Jared and a host of other folks can gather input for our very next steps. Without further ado, and perhaps this is, actually I know this is old news, but it's worthy news. It was just over a month ago, folks, we launched the Climate Action Plan for the Chicago region, the very first plan of its kind for our region, and only the third plan of its kind in the United States. So I applaud, and I hope you'll join me in applauding all of you who participated in this process over the last 2 years. So congratulations to you all. Well done, an extraordinary undertaking. We have received a tremendous amount of attention regarding that successful launch. We have received extraordinary press attention. We've received accolades, appreciation, kudos, and of course, we've received questions about what's next. And that's, again, the purpose of our call today. We have some new partnerships brewing with respect to the launch. The Commercial Club of Chicago, Climate Reality Project, Illinois, the State Climate Working Group, and so on. So we'll be able to announce a national award soon, which is very exciting. Edith and I have been embargoed on sharing anything about this, but I believe, Edith, we're able to share that in what, first week of?
Beginning of October.
Beginning of October, right.
The event is noteworthy in the great state of Louisiana.
So it could be all remote, you never know, but we will by all means broadcast to all of you as well this important news that we're excited to share. And of course, we owe all of you a huge debt of gratitude. So the next steps is to support our members in engaging with the plan, the Climate Action Plan. The purpose of the meeting again today is to discuss and brainstorm about how you would like to engage with the Climate Action Plan. We'll be looking for funding to take the next steps and want to have our rollout strategy ready. So I'm going to ask my colleague and friend Cheryl Scott to cover some meeting housekeeping. So Cheryl.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Burns. Yes, we'll be recording the meeting and posting this on the Environment Committee webpage. And we'll also be asking if you could please put your organization next to your name in Zoom. You can do that by clicking on the 3 dots next to your name and then clicking rename, or doing that in the participants panel. And we also invite your comments during the meeting, although you can comment in the chat. I think it's a small enough group that if you wanted to provide comments, please just provide your name, title, and organization when providing comments. Thanks.
Fantastic. So let's begin. Let's introduce someone who we all know well, and of course we all are grateful for her tireless efforts. Edith Macra from the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus is going to walk us through and put in context the next steps for the Climate Action Plan. Edith, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. And what I am going to do, if you want to raise your hand and then in the chat, let us know if you were at the CAP launch. So let's find out if pretty much everyone was there. Quite a few people there. Okay. Nonetheless, what I'll do is I will review the CAP just succinctly, and then talk a little bit about how it, some of the questions that we have for going forward. As Kevin said, we put 2 years of hard work into this pioneering effort, learned a lot along the way, and there's actually some precursors to the plan, and then there's lots of follow-up as well as implementation. So is everyone able to see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So the CAP, briefly, I'll go over the baseline assessments that were used to create the CAP, the stakeholder engagement process, very briefly, of how we got to setting our goals and objectives. And then specifically, we'll talk about the strategies in a little bit more detail. And then we'll move into a dialogue about communities engaging with and supporting the CAP and how we can best design that. So as you probably know, or maybe not, the CAP is based on regional data. So first off, on the mitigation side, the regional greenhouse gas inventory is something that CMAP has done for the region for a couple of cycles now, years in a row, and Jared Patton will be joining us to talk more about that. But the regional greenhouse gas inventory was used to design the mitigation objectives and strategies. And you can see briefly there, the results are the building energy is the highest source of emissions, followed by transportation. We've got it broken down there by gas and electricity. But high level, no, it's building energy and including power generation that we need to address. On the adaptation side, we also used regional data for the climate risk and vulnerability assessment, again, using data that was developed by CMAP, including here is a heat index. We use the flood susceptibility index, which helps us look regionally as well as evaluate the degree of risk. And because adaptation is a little bit different, it's not all data driven. It is data driven, but we had stakeholder engagement through a series of online workshops where we got feedback about the realities on the ground for climate hazards. In this case, I'm showing the heat assessment, and that feedback from communities based on where they're at, the nature of their community and their own experiences for how they're impacted by these climate hazards. The plan, as you know, there was a really big IPCC climate report just last week that talked about addressing greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases have been emitted since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and they're in the atmosphere for decades or hundreds more years. So while we need to immediately take action to halt greenhouse gases and mitigate climate change, we know that these gases will be with us for a long time, and the impacts of climate change will be with us for a very, very long time. So we need to adapt to these changes. And that's the adaptation portion of the plan. All at the same time, the whole plan is centered in equity. We know that the well-being of people, the communities that we serve, is why we're undertaking this plan and why the plan exists. Well, the data is regional. The actions in the plan are tailored for municipalities because we're the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus and our partnerships. We know that municipalities are ready to lead. The plan is designed around these three actions. Lead means that municipalities lead by example, making changes in their own processes and investments within the operations they have control over. They encourage others to do so. And this is a very powerful role for local governments, both by encouraging constituents, whether they're residents or businesses or institutions in your community, or encouraging other partners, whether they be state, regional agencies, businesses, federal government, to take complementary climate action. And then finally, enact, another important role for local governments, local policies that can be supportive of climate mitigation and adaptation, and then encouraging other actions at other levels of government as well. The mitigation strategies are based on the greenhouse gas emissions from 2005, and using modeling tools, we looked specifically at the sources of emissions across these various sectors represented by the wedges. And then within each of those wedges, and just for references, the top three wedges, the orange, green, and the blue, are all related to energy sources. So building energy, energy policy, and decarbonized energy sources all relate to our highest sources of emissions, which is stationary energy. And then the transportation ones and others are below that. Within each of those wedges, then we model which actions would have the greatest impact that are possible in our region. And you'll see if you follow the base of the wedge out to the year 2050, you'll see that we meet or exceed a target of 80% emissions reduction by the year 2050. But that desired net zero, which is represented by the green bar, we were not able to model that with the data, the tools, and the current technologies that we have and that we know about. So the modeling did not demonstrate net zero. But our goal, we set the goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions anyway, knowing that we have to get there. The data-driven targets then are the interim targets of a 50% reduction over the 2005 levels by 2030, an interim target in 2040 reaching the modeled and predicted 80% or more emissions reduction by the year 2050. The mitigation objectives then now are arranged, there's 8 of them, and they mirror the wedge that we just saw there. First one is demonstrate leadership to reduce emissions, decarbonize energy sources by eliminating fossil fuel generation, optimize building energy, including electrification and energy efficiency, clean energy policies, decarbonize transportation by replacing internal combustion engines, reducing vehicle miles traveled, managing water and waste sustainably, and then sustaining ecosystems to sequester carbon. I'll focus on just one of these objectives, which is decarbonized strategy. Decarbonized transportation is the objective, just to explain how the plan works. So again, each of these wedges is more further modeled and examined with these interim targets. The plan has one-pagers that describe this process a little bit more detail for each of the objectives. Then the strategies pages, so within the objective of decarbonized transportation, the strategies have, and this is just a snip of the spreadsheet. We can't show the whole thing and understand it on the slideshow here, but just you'll recognize some of these. For example, here is our strategy, which we're very excited about, our Future EV Ready program, to create accessible and reliable networks of electric vehicle chargers. And you'll see the next column over to the right is the municipal role. Municipalities can lead by installing chargers on municipal property and with partner government agencies, and encourage others, whether they're a business community or encouraging utilities, regional agencies, Illinois Department of Transportation, and others to partner and invest in a network of electric vehicle chargers. Each of the strategies then is also given an estimate of the cost and effort required, again, from the perspective of municipalities. You'll see other objectives there as well related to decarbonizing transportation. And here is the whole objective, just so that you can see how the spreadsheet is laid out. In addition to, there's other categories there that will help you as a municipal leader prioritize how to take action. That solution status tells us whether it's something that is a proven strategy that we know we can get started on right away, or whether that's evolving or conditional. Again, the effort required. More details here about achieving equity, the equity considerations for each of those strategies, and what some of those outcomes and co-benefits would be, whether there are additional benefits for a community beyond greenhouse gas emissions, or whether the mitigation strategies have adaptation benefits as well. And then who you might need to partner with as a local government in order to achieve these strategies. Greenhouse gas potentials, this is just putting into chart form what the modeling and the wedges told us. And then again, using this spreadsheet, and Cheryl and I are updating them, so you should be able to sort and use this much like, this should look a lot like the Greenest Region Compact framework. But if you'll see, I focused in on one strategy there. Oops, I thought I animated better. But you can look at that strategy and see the supporting national fuel efficiency standards is something that's a proven technology, high greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential, low cost, low effort, and you need to partner with. We need to basically advocate for this at the federal level and see benefits for reduced health impacts of tailpipe emissions. So the strategies pages can be sorted for your own use and to help you prioritize. Ned is, I think, on the line, but Ned Gardner from NOAA has been a co-author on the plan and the lead partner for the adaptation portion of the plan. And the plan looks to build resilience beginning in the year 2021. And while Mitigation has a starting and an end point. Resilience is an evolving, changing, constantly changing challenge for us that we're going to be dealing with for a long time. And not every community necessarily has felt climate change impacts and may very soon or may over time. But the idea with the adaptation portion of the plan is to build resilience so that, for example, flooding doesn't disrupt operations in a community, doesn't disrupt people getting to work, isn't excessively costly to rebuild and recover and bounce forward, and that we can adapt to expected climate changes as a more resilient community, protecting people and things that we care about. We use the steps to resilience as the foundation for the adaptation portion of the plan. And this is a process that, again, is going to be iterative over time and constantly changing. So baseline assessments, which we've done at a regional level, assessing vulnerability and risks, and the investigating options is something that we've done, again, through the process of creating the CAP for the region. This has to be downscaled and done at a community level so that each community can prioritize and plan and take actions. And this is the way the plan moves forward. The adaptation plan doesn't really build on wedges per se with a baseline greenhouse gas inventory, but what it does do is look at climate hazards and then the associated assets and impacts that we might see for that. So when we did the review process, we had a lot of people ask us, why is there so much on flooding? Because flooding and stormwater has impacts either at the community, at the household level, or in terms of transportation systems. The two top hazards in our region that we identified are excessive heat and flooding, with drought and water supply as being the next most important climate hazard we face. So again, the plan is organized, the adaptation portion of the plan is organized around these hazard impact asset pairs. Our goal, same as the mitigation side, is long-term aspirational, that we have persistent, equitable climate adaptation in our region. Interim targets, that we take the first step by 2030 and develop climate resilient governance in our communities. 2040, we really achieve the collaboration across jurisdictions to build resilience on a larger scale across the region and the state and at the federal government. And that by 2050, we achieve cohesive, resilient communities, including engaging constituents at all levels. The adaptation particularly really needs to coordinate at all levels of government to have global impact, looking at individual impacts through municipal action, regional coordination, partnership with state and federal governments to adapt to global climate change in our own communities. Adaptation objectives, there are 5 of them. And these are, even though adaptation was new to me as we tackled this plan, many of these objectives are very familiar to local government and really play on our strengths. So educate and engage the community about climate resilience and adaptation, incorporate equity and inclusion into climate adaptation efforts, collaborate and build capacity, enact plans and policies, adapt operations and investments for future climate conditions. And to focus in again on one page from the adaptation section of the plan in the appendix portion, is this page is laid out very similarly to the mitigation with municipal role and solution status. But because we're organizing around these hazard impact pairs, you can cross-reference for each of these climate hazards and their associated impacts, how impactful that particular strategy would be. And to focus in again on one there, I'm going to expand that. So this particular strategy, strengthen emergency and adaptive response skills among staff, civic leaders, and allied organization, something municipalities can do on their own. They can just lead and take these actions. The strategy is proven and moderate cost and medium level of impact. So this might be a strategy to prioritize. And we've said this before at the plan launch, this was underscored by all speakers on the plan, but we have to act now. The IPCC report came out just after we've launched, and it says that we need immediate action, and we need to take this approach of mitigating greenhouse gas emissions immediately, adapting both immediately and long-term, and staying centered on equity. So now to shift into the kind of the context for the plan. That's an overview of the plan, and we'd appreciate if you have any questions, you don't understand it, you missed the kickoff and you want to learn more about it, we hope you read it. But now we're just in the stage of socializing the CAP. As Kevin mentioned, we had a lot of publicity, and so we've had a lot of inquiries and invitations that we're starting to foster new partnerships to move towards implementation. We have some plans for regional scale implementation. It'll probably be picking up the pace of the kinds of things that we did, like Soul Smart and EV Ready, to take action on high priority strategies. But the reason for this conversation today is, what do we need to do to support the MMC members in engaging with this plan? And from there, we'll take your feedback and design supportive programs. And we'll be working together to raise money so that we can then move into the next phase of CAP. So with that,
it's pretty straightforward now. It's really soliciting your commentary and suggestions with how best to engage with the plan moving forward. So if you want to put your comments in the chat, feel free. I know Cheryl and Edith will moderate. If you just simply want to raise your hand and be called upon to share your thoughts, that would be helpful as well. There's a comment from Eric Simon at River Forest.
Okay, so we've got some questions right away about the greenhouse gas inventory, and I think that would be helpful. So what we thought we would do today, just because it's always a little more awkward on Zoom, but we can also be efficient too. We thought we would trigger some discussion with some Zoom poll questions. So I think we're ready for the first one, Cheryl, is that correct?
Yes, the climate poll.
Okay, so just to get some feedback on the plan. So again, if you have any questions, please do. Did it launch already? I'm a little confused because there's results in here.
I can ask Katie Friedman if she could let you know. I'm not.
So can I just ask if anyone to speak up? The first question is, what is the climate around climate?
Yep.
In your community? That's already been launched?
It was launched, I think possibly when we logged in.
Yeah, when we logged in, it asked us those questions.
Oh, okay. That was a little premature there, but that's fine. So if you haven't answered that poll, looks like we have 18 of 28 people already responded. So please go ahead, and we'll leave that poll open for a minute. We'd like to know, just based on, because things have changed. We launched the plan. We know as we've been doing the plan that many of you are expressing concerns. We've heard from a lot of constituents and citizen commissions and mayors. So let's just take temperature for what's going on out there. So there are two parts to your question. What is the climate around climate in your community? And then the second part of the question is, how would you describe the level of concern recently? So we're at 21 responses. Okay, so I think we were at 22 responses, and I think I'm going to close it quick and countdown here, answer quickly if you are about ready to go. So ending the poll there should display now. Everyone can see that there should be, oops, no, you can't see that.
There we go.
There we go. Now you can see that. So just so that everyone, and for the recording, we can just discuss this. So around the first question, what is the climate around climate? We asked who is concerned, constituents expressing our concern. This is pretty good. 68%. Village board council is expressing concern. 55%. Mayor is concerned. 45%. Staff is concerned. 59%. Other.
You know, if I may, Edith, I have a question for anyone and everyone who participated and answered. My question is this. How are you defining expressing concern?
Please take yourself off mute. We have a small enough group. I think if you want to either just raise your hand, let's just go ahead and speak up. And if it doesn't work, we'll ask you to raise your hand.
Yeah.
So let's talk more about that.
Just the whole definition of that
Mhm.
phrase, expressing concern. Is that simply, for example, last night at the Geneva City Council meeting, we talked about stormwater management to a great extent. We have a facility that on average pumps about 3.5 million gallons a day. May of 2020, at our peak, we pumped 23 million gallons. That's concerning. Obviously, our system is not built for that kind of impact. Is that a similar concern, or is it just concern with respect to everything happening around us and my God, what do we do locally?
Does anyone want to speak up on that?
Ben, yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Ben.
All right. Yeah, fantastic. Great to meet and see so many of you. We've got some pretty, I know that many of you may already know of the Naperville Environment and Sustainability Task Force. Jody Trendler, I believe, has participated in past meetings of the committee. So they put together a rather comprehensive report called Sustainable Naperville 2036. 2036 being the year after our contract for electricity ends. So yeah, they're very active. We just got their full report last Monday, the same day as the IPCC report.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot in there. I'm working closely with them, and we're actually hosting a city council workshop with NEST on August 31st with our council members here in Naperville.
Ben, will you be willing to share that report with either Cheryl or Edith?
Absolutely.
And I'm particularly interested in that, in your opening statement with respect to its post contractual obligations with your electric supplier currently.
Well, that's the end date of their 86 recommended strategies and goals.
Got it. Okay.
So,
We can maybe, Ben, we can put that plan in the chat. You know, it's a draft release.
yeah, I'll give it a shot. I'll try and find it and share it with folks.
That's great. Anyone else?
I'll speak on that.
Yes, Marcus.
Due to recent events coming out of the now 15 months of negotiating this omnibus bill, announcing NRG's coal plant closure in the city of Waukegan has brought climate back on the forefront of this city, with the prospects of not knowing if NRG is going to do the right thing and mitigate the land that it has held on the lakefront. We've also have higher reports of forever chemicals being located on the lake, not only in Waukegan, but further down in Highland Park, as well as in Deerfield. And so on top of that, with the lead line replacements now being brought down on all of us from the state and the feds, yes, climate adaptation and climate resiliency is back on the forefront of constituents as well as council.
Got it. Thank you. Anyone else, please feel free to chime in. The perspective is, I think, most valuable for me, certainly, and I would expect similarly for Edith and Cheryl and the others, Jared, because we can express concern, but if we're not, in my humble opinion, if we're not articulating what that concern is, then what are we really doing? You know?
So just to keep the discussion moving, just feedback on the poll, if you're not seeing it, is 82% of our audience said that the growing concern.
Right.
And a very small number said not sure, or about the same concern. So and then just to summarize what the poll says, if anyone wants to just further expound on what that other is, but we basically have the high level of concern across the board, constituents, village board, mayor, and staff. But what is the other? You want to tell us about that? And then thanks to Glenn from Westmont, who also commented on what that means. And it's village staff plus mayor monitors the proceedings of the Mayors Caucus, Environment Committee, and the EIC, Environment Improvement Commission reports to the village manager. So thank you for that kind of feedback and getting some response. Okay, so I think we can move on.
Okay. You have another question, I believe?
I do have another question. Let me just get my way through the.
No problem.
Make sure I do this right. Oh, I got it, sorry. So the next question, actually, let me give some foundation here. The question is about expressing support for the CAP.
Mhm.
Let me show 2 slides if you can, just to give some context. So our next question for you will be about how you would like to express support for the CAP. And then for context, here are the goals of the Climate Action Plan. These are the mitigation goals and the adaptation goals with our interim targets. And these are resolved. These are finished. They're good. They've tested well with launch in the audience. So in the Greenest Region Compact, and here for the 136 communities, thank you all, who supported the Greenest Region Compact over the last 5.5 years, there was a municipal resolution tailored for each community that adopted the Greenest Region Compact and supports the following consensus goals of the Greenest Region Compact and agrees to work to achieve them, both in their own communities and in collaboration for the region. So if you will, in political speak, the village board, the mayors stuck their neck out and said, we are working on these goals. We did not ask municipalities to specifically choose strategies to move forward on, but just to agree to be adaptive over time, to take the Greenest Region Compact framework back to their own communities and work out the strategies to be responsive over time. And if you take, for example, the opportunity, because a lot of folks ask me, how do we choose our strategies? We got the opportunity to work on Soul Smart, and we had many of the communities who said, yeah, that looks like a good one, let's do that. And then of course, we've had great success with it. So the strategy, would it be, that's the next question, is that a similar approach that we might want to have for expressing support? So I'll go ahead and launch that question if you want to give us some feedback on your thoughts on that. So the question is, how and when would your community like to express support for the CAP? And there are questions there related to timing and the complexity of a resolution. Is it a new resolution? Do you want to just rely on the Greenest Region Compact? Do you want to have more work done on your own CAP before we put together a resolution? And because that's the reason we asked the question about urgency. So please go ahead and respond. Just checking, is that live? Can you all respond? Oh, there we go. Got some results now. And there is a secondary question, which looks like you're already find it and you're responding to. So if you do wish to adopt a new resolution, what would you like, a new resolution, what would you like to support? Would you like a general statement of support for the CAP? Or do you want to just support the goals and targets and objectives? And then do you want to be specific about strategies that you want to tackle in your own community, or do you not support the cap? We always give you that option.
Our friend Robert Wagner just had a very interesting comment in the chat. Do you see that, Edith?
Yes.
That's really neat.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
You're ahead of us. Thank you. Just a month out. So got 18 responses.
Hmm.
19. I'll give it 10 more seconds here. We're at 20.
Yeah, Ben, great point.
Okay, so let's look at the results, and I'm hoping you can see them, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so how and when would your community like to express support for the cap? So we were looking at 35% supporting a resolution of the, adopting a new resolution supporting the cap as soon as possible. 25%, that's a little tighter than I would like to know for clarity about what we're supposed to do here. Waiting for the GRC to be updated with cap strategies to express support. And I'll go into details a little bit more on that in the later portion of the meeting on what that means. And then just a few of you, that's 15%, or 3 of you saying just rely on the Greenest Region Compact, basically no new support needed, because we do have climate objectives in the Greenest Region Compact. Everyone is either supportive of the cap or nobody wants to not express support for the cap. And then again, other. Any discussion on that?
Chime in, folks, if you have anything to say. Just
Hey, this is Ned joining in. I saw that 15% looking at wanting to have community-specific cap strategies. So I'm wondering for those 15%, if they've reviewed this action plan sufficiently and determined that, you know, the strategies there can be a launching point, and because certainly it's meant as to support that function. And it would be valuable to hear how and if you're able to pick up this cap to do what you need to do locally.
good point.
I almost want to revisit that question, because like I said, it's 35 that says, let's just get going now, and 25 that says, wait for the GRC to be adopted. So we'll go through my last couple of slides and you'll see, and we'll maybe revisit that again with a casual question. Okay, and then for the new resolution, what would you like to support? So Kevin, I'm going to let you react to this one. 60% said general statement of support for the cap, which if I had a chance to reword that differently, I don't know that I would have supported or just teased out supporting just the goals, strategies, and objectives. Excuse me, the goals, targets, and objectives. So I think the general statement of support would be inclusive of the goals and targets. And please clarify in the chat if that's not the case. And then half, again, looking for supporting specific strategies for the community, which again is pretty tight, pretty close to the other one.
I mean, that's how I interpreted it, because I answered the question. I actually clicked on several of the answers, but I think a general statement of support is good, but I suspect that the majority of our communities represented here and represented throughout our efforts are going to want to hear about specific strategies in their respective communities. To me, I understand that nexus.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we launched the GRC, there were many of the communities that said, this is great, we can just get behind the goals and we feel really good about this. And then they came along, most of them came along, or not, as was suitable for their community once we had strategies in place. There were a few that said, we don't want to adopt the Greenest Region Compact until we have our own scaled down sustainability plan. So I'm sort of feeling the same. We're a little bit split on it, slightly more in favor of going ahead and just saying, let's get going, let's support the CAP, and then we'll work on this on our own. So I think that puts some pressure on us to develop the tools quickly and to get things aligned between the Greenest Region Compact and the CAP really quickly. David, you got to.
I do. I have a comment. I think whether it's a specific ask or a general support resolution for my community, it really would help to receive a request from MMC for action from our board. It forces it onto the committee's agenda, it forces it onto the board's agenda, and I need to write a memo then, and there's a discussion. So whether or not it includes specific actions in the resolution or not, the committees will then be talking about specifics and asking questions. So in my community, otherwise it's largely a staff initiative. So I just want to stress the importance of MMC asking the communities for action.
Got it. It's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to pipe up on that comment, on that topic of what the nature of the resolution should be? If not, let's move on. And so the next topic up, I just have a transitional slide there. Pretty much turning this over to Ryan Glancy, and then on membership and branding. Kevin, would you like to introduce Ryan?
I certainly would. I'm just having a little challenge here with my, actually go ahead either. I'm having a struggle here with the, oh good Lord.
With the logistics? Okay,
Yeah,
so
my apologies.
Ryan Glancy has been our partner on the production of the CAP, and Ryan is a technical coordinator now with Global Covenants of Mayors for Climate and Energy North America. But when we began our project, the organization that is funded by the European Union was International Urban Cooperation. So he selected our project when we applied, and then really has mentored us through the development of the plan and continues to be supportive today. So Ryan will talk about the relationship that the Mayors Caucus and cities throughout the globe and regions have with the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and just talk to you about opportunities for how to use that for branding around our CAP. So Ryan?
Hello, morning everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, and the slides are looking okay too? Okay, well, thank you so much, Edith and Mayor Burns and everyone for having me here today. As Edith said, I'm working actually on behalf of the European Union, who part funders of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and have been involved in this kind of regional effort, along with other regional efforts, which I'll talk about in my presentation in the US as they relate to the Global Covenant. So I guess my my role here today is just off the back of that last poll to think about, you know, as the individual communities, municipalities that are involved in this regional plan, how you may or may not want to engage in the Global Covenant of Mayors, you know, and those that responded to the previous poll in terms of looking at the regional plan and trying to create kind of local strategies for that. You know, how the Global Covenant of Mayors may kind of support that kind of approach to the planning. But I guess just before I get started, I just wanted to add to the growing accolades for the work of this regional plan that Edith has led and Mayor Burns has been supporting throughout, as well as Jared, who I think will speak after me from CMAP. You know, this has been such a great effort and is turning into a really, really great case study for us at the Global Covenant of Mayors. Something we're really trying to promote. I think, as Mayor Burns said at the outset, now one of 3 metropolitan regions in the US that are really showing, you know, leadership on this, and we're so grateful for this work and for this great case study, and really looking to kind of track and follow this implementation phase. Obviously, you know, that's the key, right? We've been through this planning process. Now we've got some great information and evidence, and now kind of how this gets implemented within each of the municipalities is really key to the success. We're keen to keep following that. So just to give a brief overview of what the Global Covenant Mayors is, some on the call may have already seen this originally when we started our kind of stakeholder engagement for this regional plan. But we are now an association of over 10,500 cities, regions, communities worldwide. So it's obviously a huge initiative. There's over 800 million people represented now by the GCOM, so we're over 10% of the population, and continuing to grow very quickly, especially in the lead up actually to COP26. We're seeing lots of, and the IPCC report that we saw last week, we're seeing lots of interest, climate emergency declarations, etc. So the initiative continues to grow very quickly. And the basic premise of the Global Covenant of Mayors is really to create, you know, an international network of cities, regions, communities that, you know, are taking climate change very seriously, and taking a lot of ambitious action on that part. So that's the kind of key focus. On our part, on the GCOM side, we endeavor to try and amplify the voice of local governments at the global level. So when it comes to the COP and the UNFCCC processes, really demonstrating what regions like yours can do, A, to contribute to reducing national emissions in the US, but B, to, you know, what impact that might be at a global scale as well. And the idea behind that is to try and, you know, encourage the international community and national governments to therefore redirect resources and recognize, you know, how important cities and regions can be in this fight that we've got. We try to instigate collaboration across all levels of government, and that speaks exactly to, you know, the kind of initiative like we have here in the Chicago region now, where we, you know, hopefully we're making some engagement with national government. We now have a regional entity which has done this due diligence and evidence collecting at a regional level, and then we also want the municipal local level to their, you know, follow up and implement and do their own due diligence to do that. So having this kind of vertical integration on climate change is something that we see as of real importance in this fight as well. That's something that we support. And then as an initiative, we have these three kind of sub-initiatives which are aimed at supporting cities and regions to do this work. Data for cities, innovate for cities, and invest for cities, which I'll just quickly touch on now. The innovate for cities is a kind of a research and development type initiative aimed at really understanding the kind of key issues, bottlenecks, technological data that cities are facing, and then trying to kind of mobilize the international community, academia, national government to be able to try and answer what those issues are. So we try to kind of create those partnerships to address those issues. Invest for Cities is all about communicating the potential that cities have, and then B, obviously trying to mobilize sources of public and private funding to be able to implement, you know, these actions that we're identifying. So there's various partnerships that we're developing on that front. But, you know, key, and I think probably in the US context will be, you know, mobilization of private capital and non-traditional sources of finance for municipalities to be able to implement these actions that they're coming up with. So that's another key kind of area where we're developing partnerships and helping to build capacity within our membership to be able to think outside the box a bit on the finance side. And then the third one is Data for Cities, and this is all about trying to provide, you know, cities with evidence to be able to make informed decisions, whether that's data for greenhouse gas inventories. We've got various partnerships with the World Resource Institute, Google, and others to help us to help cities develop their inventories, but also information on, you know, how do you communicate that to your citizens? What are the co-benefits of climate action in terms of job creation, improved air quality, improved quality of life, that kind of thing. So creating that data so that our cities can effectively communicate that and develop the information that they need to make these choices. So I think as most on the call will know, and from the launch event, I think this was touched upon, basically as a project, as Edith mentioned in my introduction, we had this International Urban Cooperation Project, which ran for 4 years, but ended in November of last year. And that through that process, we basically supported 5 regions in the US to become Global Covenant Mayors members, and then a bit of funding for some consultants to come in and support the process in terms of developing the greenhouse gas inventory. So the 5 regions are there on your screen now. You'll see within all but one of those regions, we also have a Global Covenant of Mayors membership at the community level as well. So in the Chicago region, that currently stands at 4 from Aurora, the city of Chicago, Evanston, Highland Park. But as I said, we would like to try and grow that. And this is where it kind of merges with our previous conversation around localizing this regional climate action plan. You know, if you are a municipality that does want to do more due diligence and take the information that's been kind of collected and compiled by CMAP and really focus in at the local level in terms of your independent strategies, how you prioritize those, and what your individual impact is in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, etc. You know, that's what we would support and encourage, basically having that local level of membership. Won't be for everyone, and I would say, you know, not necessary in every context, but for those that want to go through that due diligence, but also maybe want the exposure and the promotion that GCOM can offer at the international and national level, then that would be one way that you could, you know, continue to engage and implement the work that Metropolitan Mayors Caucus has done. So what that would involve is basically, this is an adhesion letter, what it commits MMC to do and what it would commit a municipality to do would be to develop a greenhouse gas inventory. I think Jared will speak after me as to some potential support that CMAP might offer local communities in that vein, but also to look at the work that NOAA and MMC did and look at the climate risks and vulnerabilities that apply to your specific municipality or community, and then come up with targets both on the mitigation and adaptation side within your community, and then to, you know, to develop a plan. And likely that, you know, that plan would follow a very similar theme. I think especially on the, I think on both sides, but especially on the adaptation side, you know, the municipal boundaries don't really change the climate risks and vulnerabilities that you're all going to face, and so most of those are going to stand true. And I would argue that on the greenhouse gas inventory side, you know, a lot of the outcomes of MMC's kind of regional inventory will apply. You know, there may be some differences as you go outside of the kind of dense urban center of Chicago towards the edge. You may see some slightly, you know, may see transport, for example, being more of an emission source than commercial buildings. But just having that extra level of due diligence into the plan could be of value. The process for that, so once you sign as a community, sign that commitment letter, what we would ask is that you would submit the greenhouse gas inventory, the risk and vulnerability assessment, and your targets to us within 2 years. That's not kind of a hard deadline, that's just what we encourage. And then the climate action plan, that's kind of the compendium, all of that, and the various strategies of how you would reduce emissions and build resiliency 1 year later after 3 years. And then there's kind of a 2-year cycle after that to just kind of check in with us and let us know how you're progressing through that. There is in the works also, I should mention just very briefly, an energy access pillar. So in addition to climate mitigation, climate adaptation, we're looking at how we can improve access to sustainable and affordable energy. Details of that are forthcoming, but just want to make mention of that. And then this is, you know, this frankly is one of the parts that cities really like, is that the Global Covenant of Mayors, you know, will evaluate all of the information that you've collected and kind of validate it. And this is useful to just demonstrate the kind of quality of the work that you've done and that you've got a credible plan together. So we issue badges at various stages on both the mitigation adaptation side, soon on the energy access side as well. So when you submit your inventory, you get a badge saying you've got a GCOM compliant inventory, same with the target and the plan, and then similar process on the adaptation side. So cities really like this, to be able to go back to their committees and their boards and say, hey, look, we did this work, and we've done a credible job, and that's been recognized by the Global Covenant. So yeah, I'll stop there. That was very kind of whirlwind. I'm happy to answer any questions if we've got time now. Or Edith, I don't know if there's any other aspects you wanted me to describe about how this weaves in with the work of the region and the regional cap.
I just shared the link to our badges. But I think if we could talk just a little bit more about, because we'll talk more about the branding, but what are the opportunities for municipalities, if anything, to associate themselves with the GCOM membership that the Mayor's Caucus holds?
Yeah, I think that's a discussion that, as you know, the 3 regions now in the US that are GCOM members and have these regional climate action plans, that they were pilots, and we still on the GCOM side need to think about how we kind of allow the branding of that trickle down to municipalities. Obviously, we're still looking for the community membership at that lower level of as well. So that's something we can, you know, I think it's safe to say that we can come up with some kind of affiliation between MMC, the municipality, and GCOM to be able to demonstrate that partnership and that relationship. But that's still, to be honest, that's still a little bit in the works from our side, just to see, you know, where we set that boundary and where we set the limits on that.
So we do have time for questions, and then we have a poll question just for a little bit more.
Exactly. Any questions or comments? Ryan, thank you for the presentation.
No problem. Happy to.
And my introduction would have been far more elaborate, by the way.
And funnier.
Yeah.
It's always funnier. Any questions on GCOM?
Anything at all? Well, run the poll question. Edith, what do you think?
Let's do that.
Let's do that.
Okay, so the question is, how would you like to align with GCOM? So that uncertain alignment with MMC through our membership, or if you'd like your own GCOM membership, or it's not important, or you're just not sure. And we don't, I think, have Aurora, Highland Park, Evanston.
Right.
On the, who else? Chicago. Or Evanston, right, to talk about their GCOM participation. Katie, you're on the line, actually, aren't you? You did the GCOM reporting for Highland Park?
I did.
Okay.
It's fairly intensive, but if the Mayor's Caucus has a lot of the data from the regional greenhouse gas inventory, that would make a lot of things easier, I would think.
Except that it has to be a local GHG inventory, correct, Ryan? The entity supporting would have to, you'd have to have your own, basically, if you didn't catch, if you didn't catch that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So the emissions would have to kind of end at your municipal boundary, basically, and so it would need some significant localization. I mean, to Katie's point, you know, that is an aspect that we've had a lot of feedback from cities on, and we are working to try and simplify both the level of information that we request and the current process for reporting, which isn't as intuitive as I would hope it could be. So that's in the works. But you know, I don't want to make it sound like it's not a lift. You know, there is some work involved there for sure. Just while people are filling out that poll, I mean, I've got on the slide now the support at Global Covenant USA. If you've got any more questions on the initiative, happy to, you know, you can send emails there. That's our help desk. Or Edith, if you want to share my contact details with anyone off the back of this meeting, I'm happy to follow up with calls or provide, you know, that was a very quick snapshot of GCOM. Provide more information. Happy to do one-on-one calls as well for those. Well, we've got now 4 now that have suggested they might be interested in their own GCOM membership.
You know, Ryan, in theory, because MMC has a relationship that allows it to use that brand of GCOM, I could not attach that brand to the City of Geneva's letterhead because I independently am not a GCOM member yet. That's really, in essence, what I'm talking about.
That's the current situation, yeah. And you know, going back to a little bit to my presentation, I think what a lot of municipalities want is kind of their own badges and their own profile on the GCOM website to show that, you know, that they're taking climate change seriously, and you know, and they can demonstrate that to their political leadership and their citizens, you know, that way. But like I said, we can try and work on a way that we can show some affiliation. I don't quite know how we do that just yet. But that's, you know, that's on my to-do list to try and figure out how we create that link so that cities can demonstrate that they're part of this movement.
Okay,
Because, realistically, Edith, I proudly say, and I'm sure every community represented here, we're proud members of the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus.
that's what we're seeing from the poll.
Exactly, yeah. from the poll.
Right, is that so that MMC regional membership is sufficient? And I think that leads us up to our next question about how we brand around the cap. There are a few of that you would like your own GCOM membership, and so many more of you are not sure. So Ryan, if you wouldn't mind putting your contact information, any relevant links in the chat, and of course we'll share opportunities as you pass them along. As Ryan said, there's a lot of good support and some introductory webinars, and I can certainly forward the invitations if you want to explore over time.
Sure, will do, Edith. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess with that,
Now about our own branding, right?
right. So yeah, Kevin, why don't you kick off the conversation, and then I do have one more poll question to share there. So
Well, I think the conversation is fairly fluid. It's regarding whether or not, and I believe we should, how, when, who should be involved in developing our own logo, identity, whatever the case might be, or wherever you want to describe it. Modify the GRC logo to indicate climate support, or no new branding is needed at, altogether. But my gut tells me that many of us who participated in this process in the last 2 years would like to have some standalone badge, as it were, or logo that talks about the climate action plan in concert with GRC as a complement to. If I'm mistaken, please chime in. So.
So we've got some feedback coming in already, and the poll question is exactly what Kevin just asked. What kind of branding that shows support for the CAP is helpful to your community? A new logo or identity just for climate, modify the GRC logo to indicate climate support, or no new branding?
Yeah.
And then of course, you're not interested in branding, that's an option or other.
And I'm going to hazard a guess that the majority will respond, modify logo to indicate. That's my guess. So.
You're a sneaky one. We're at 17 of our responses. So again, another 10, 15 seconds here.
Yeah. Lisa, I like it. We need to keep things simple. Good point.
Just a fun trivia fact, the Greenest Region Compact logo that we have, there was, as many of you might remember, there was a Greenest Region Compact, the original. I modified it to be the GRC2, and then because it was confusing and hard to remember, we dropped the GRC2 in all references, except there's still a 2 that lingers on the logo. So we did try to keep it simple, so we could probably do another update. Okay, we're at 19 participants, and Kevin, you are indeed correct. We have 58% looking for us to update the GRC logo to indicate climate support. And then 26% looking for a new logo or identity for climate. So, and 3 people thinking it's fine as is, using just the existing logos, either GCOM or GRC. So it looks like our challenge is GRC plus climate. Okay.
Very good. Jared, your comment on the chat: could a new logo cause confusion for communities that do not wish to pass a resolution supporting the CAP? It's an interesting question. And I'm upset that you asked it. Thank you very much. I don't know. Is what you're saying that GRC is apolitical, but the CAP might be seen as political? Or
I'm just throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks. But I could see a world where some communities feel like they've made a decision not to support the CAP, but they still want to stick with the GRC, and they could see pressure then to not use the GRC logo if it includes something that their board hasn't supported.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our friend from Naperville, Ben, talked about pretty eloquently that all these decisions require consultation with the elected leaders, because you're right, we can't spring that on a council or a village board saying, by the way, agenda item 4 is, without any sort of background, because that'll be an ugly discussion possibly.
And to stay on track, Jared, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to you? So quick introduction? Kevin, you want me to do it?
Yep, fire away. I'm closing out of the chats here, so.
Unless you want to make fun of Jared, which.
No, I think Jared's, he's he's the brother I never wanted. So.
Jared, I can't really beat that. Jared is our partner on this from CMAP, if those of you who don't know, who has been with us in the CAP planning process all along. So we're really grateful for.
A good friend of ours. So Jared.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that was the briefest presentation in the history of this committee.
All right, sorry about that. I was sharing my
it's all
screen
yours.
and I lost the unmute button, tragically. All right, you can see my screen, hear me okay? Everything's
sir.
good?
Yes.
Sir. Thank
All
you.
right, great. Well, thanks for inviting me here to speak this morning. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm particularly excited to be here talking about this project, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory, because it does relate so closely to the Climate Action Plan. And as a planner, I always get excited when you can go straight from plan drafting into implementation. So it's really great to be doing that now. Before I get into the content, I want to just give a little bit of background about the project. This is a one-year project, so we just kicked off development, which means it's a great time to get your feedback because things are not yet set in stone. So you'll have to wait a little while to get the results from this, but you do have the ability to impact things. So I'd really appreciate some feedback. But before I get to the feedback section, I think it's a good idea to start with what this actually is and what we've done in the past. So as the name suggests, a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory is essentially a report that shows what our emissions are for the region. So we've done this twice before, once in 2010 and 2015, and those projects were pretty similar. Both of them included emissions from buildings, transportation, and waste, and both of those ended up creating both a regional total and county level totals as well. And the one exception there is for Cook County. We conducted inventories for both the city of Chicago and suburban Cook County. So you could see at the county total or just the city or just the suburbs. But that's the general breakdown, more or less county level. And in addition to total emissions, we also do a brief trends analysis. So you can see how things changed from 2010 to 2015, both at the absolute level, but then also getting into the sectors a little bit. So you can see how emissions from vehicles have changed and how emissions from electricity or natural gas have changed. And then finally, we also created basic projections through the year 2050 that show, based on per capita emissions levels and our population forecast, what is likely to happen between now and then if our levels stay the same, if they become more efficient, or if they become much more efficient. And while I'm not going to give you the overview of what the results of those analyses were in this presentation, it is worth saying that those analyses were really helpful for creating the climate action plan. A lot of the recommendations included in that document were based on models that used our data. So it's something that we have used regionally. We've heard from our county partners that it's really helpful. We've also heard from local partners that it's often not super helpful for their work because it's hard to see where your community of 10, 20, 50,000 people show up in the data for a county of over 1 million people. So that's kind of the background for where we were when we set out to scope the project we're working on now. And that leads us to where we are today. So the first point about this project that I want to make is at the very top, this is an inventory for the year 2019. We are on a 5-year reporting cycle, but we decided that 2020 would just be too much of an outlier to base real decisions on moving forward. We recognize that some of the trends from 2020, like working from home or more biking and walking, will likely stick around for the years to come, but we're almost certainly not going back to the hard lockdowns that characterized much of 2020. So instead, we're doing 2019, so it's a small shift. And importantly, we're doing everything from the past inventories. So if you've seen what we've done in the past, don't fear, all of that will be included, but we are adding new elements. And really specifically, we're trying to add as much local level data as possible. So what that is, how we're doing that is not creating emissions inventories for every municipality. We decided that was kind of beyond our abilities. But we will be producing what we call emissions summaries for all 284 municipalities in the region and all 77 Chicago community areas. So the idea there is, we don't have the ability to produce 300 emissions inventories, but we do have a lot of that data, and we can share those with communities that will provide hopefully a kind of good enough snapshot of where their emissions are. And for communities that are interested in taking it to the next step and doing a true inventory that works for GCOM compliance or other reporting platforms, you're going to start out ahead of the curve. So a little bit more information about what those local summaries will include, because I think that's what people are probably most interested in. We will include building emissions and energy use. So hopefully we'll be able to say, this is what your building emissions were. This is how much came from electricity, how much from natural gas, possibly even how much that energy cost. I would love to do that. Can't make a promise yet, but that's what we're thinking about. For transportation, we will also hopefully come up with a way to report those emissions locally, but that requires a little bit more thinking because a lot of the models that we use at the regional level get a little fuzzy at the local level, and we want to make sure that we're reporting something that's more than just noise. So we're thinking about how that will be, but at a minimum, we will have something for transportation and something for building. And then we'll also be showing other indicators that are not directly related to emissions, but are really valuable for tracking action on emissions reductions or climate resilience. And this is the part that I really want your feedback on, is to figure out what those indicators are. My next slide goes into more detail about those indicators, but first I want to draw your attention to the right side of your screen, where you see a document called the City of Carlsbad Snapshot. And this is a report produced by our sister agency in San Diego, known as SANDAG, and they produce emissions inventories for all of their municipalities. They only have about a dozen, so it's a little easier, but we thought this was a good model for something like what we could produce. So this is page 1 of the document, and it shows some of the recent accomplishments the community's had, some of their demographics, and just quick facts about the community, and a breakdown of where their emissions are coming from. We would love to produce something like that. And then page 2 on my next slide gets into those local level indicators. And this is really what we would love to be able to provide. So, we might not be able to tell you everything, but we can tell you how many electric vehicle chargers there are, how many electric vehicle registrations are in your community, how many bike lanes you have, or what your walk score is, or transit access. And the idea there is that we provide enough detail that you can see where your community is today and compare yourself to your nearby communities and see how you can possibly move the needle on transportation emissions. Related, there are some other indicators like air quality index or criterion pollutants, which are pollutants regulated by the Clean Air Act. We could report where those are since it is an impact on climate. We could report tree canopy coverage. We could also show some things that are more planning related. So we could say whether a community has a climate action plan or a sustainability plan, or if they're a GRC member. And this is really where I want to stop talking and ask if you have any ideas for things you think would be helpful to track, either in your own community to hold your village or city accountable, or that you'd be curious to see what other people are doing, because we haven't figured out this list yet. So there's still time to include it. The 2 caveats that I would say is that they need to be things that are available across the region. We'd like to, keep some standardization, and they also need to be things that are pretty efficient to report. So, we do have a budget to do some data analysis. If we're going to include something like tree canopy coverage, that will take some work, but we're doing this 300 times. So if it takes an hour for each one, probably can't include it. So this is where I'll stop talking for a minute and would love to hear what ideas you have for things you would like to see us repeating or reporting that are not emissions. You can either unmute, you can put it in the chat, or in a moment I'll give you my email and you can follow up.
So Jared, we have 2 questions in the chat. And Lisa Gillis, since you're new to us, do you mind asking that question? Unmuting yourself and asking that question directly, and then also identify the community you're in. Lisa, you're with us. Jared, just to keep things moving. Lisa Gillis asks, if we have an inventory, may we share to enhance and improve?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see anything that you have.
Okay. And then Katie has a question. Katie Friedman, the question is, with building emissions, will it be municipal or community-wide, or split up between residential and commercial? I guess sort of the detail on the.
Sure, yeah. So this will be community-wide, and this is the one that we have the most confidence in because we already have the data. But we basically get consumption numbers from the utilities, so ComEd, Peoples, NICOR, that say under certain billing classes, typically residential, commercial, and industrial, how much energy is used. We then use an emissions factor to estimate how much, what emissions were produced based on that consumption. So it will be throughout your community. You'll be able to tell in those sectors where it's coming from. The only exception may be for very small communities. Sometimes, if you only have one manufacturing facility or something, there may be privacy concerns, but we haven't thought too much about that yet, because as I said, we're at the very early stages of this.
And another question from Dave Wilms in Sustain Libertyville. Can a CO2 footprint total be calculated for each community and a per capita footprint? The canopy coverage could also be used as a sink for communities to encourage tree planting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will report total numbers, we'll report absolute numbers, per capita numbers, and I would love to move towards something like a GDP or GRP or GLP. I don't know what you call it, the different scales, but some kind of economic related indicator as well. But again, no promises, still figuring it out. In terms of tree canopy coverage and carbon sequestration, that hits right on the head what we're trying to get at here, which is we can't report things like carbon sequestration. We just don't have the data for it, but we can hint at those things with things like tree canopy coverage. So, we're not going to say that this is what's happening, but we can show you something that gives you a general idea of what is likely happening.
Another suggestion from Tessa Marie, by the way, a former GRC Corps member, just to brag, a planning related indicator could be whether or not a municipality has a climate or sustainability related commission.
I like that. Yeah.
Great point. Thank you.
Very good point.
It's actually a GRC strategy as well.
Right.
Edith, I think that plays into goal number 1 of the plan, the 2030, not goal, excuse me, target. Which is governance, getting the strategies in this plan implemented through governance.
Absolutely. And really gets us towards the end target of sustained resilience. Cohesive, if that's the right word. It wasn't cohesive, but engaged, sustained resilience. Any other comments or questions for Jared? Again, a small group, I think you can feel free to unmute and just raise your hand. We've got some contributions from Ben, new to the city of Naperville, about the tree equity score. Thank you.
And there's Jared's contact information. So
yeah, if you don't have anything to say right now, please send me an email. Probably better than a phone call at this point, since I'm often not in the office, but get a hold of me. I'm happy to talk about this at any point. Would love to hear your feedback.
Yeah. And actually, Jared, there's one more question from Katie, and I think it's an important one because of so I'll just ask it and I'll let you respond. This may be outside of scope, but perhaps the flood vulnerability could be included.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're looking at flood vulnerability. We're also in the process of looking at a related indicator for heat. So some kind of heat vulnerability index that could be included.
Okay.
But as I've said, this is still very early days. So.
Good. Well, thank you everybody for your feedback.
Thank you, Jared.
So let me launch a few more questions to get the poll, and then I'm going to close with the presentation here. So with what Jared queued up, where do we have this question? Cheryl, do we have a question? Oh yeah, community regional cap questions. Got it. Okay, let me launch this poll and I'll read them through. What are your plans for your own community cap? Because we know some of you have been working on it. There are a few of you that have it. So tell us if you have a cap, you're working on a cap, you'd like to have your own cap, you don't have the resources to create one, you have no interest in a community scale, or whether or not the regional cap is sufficient for your needs. And then also a related question is, does the presence of the regional cap now, and what you know about it, change your plans or your intentions of your own community scale cap.
Some
So
good
we've got-
responses.
Mhm. Okay, 10 more seconds. Tell us what your plans are for your, or whether you have your own community cap.
Thanks, Ben. Maybe is always a good answer.
Okay, so let's look at the results here.
Look at that.
So there are just 2 of you that have self-identified as having your own cap, and I just using that in raw numbers, not in percentage, that's 18%. 6 of you would still like to have your own cap, or 55%, and then 36% of 4 of you don't have the resources to create your own cap. And as far as whether or not the cap, having the regional cap in place changes your plans, 64% said no, and 36% said yes. Feel free to expound on that in the chat. That's our interesting answers. There was some belief that having the regional cap would make it much easier for municipalities to move forward with actions. So we are hoping that if you don't have the resources for your own cap, that this would, the regional cap would help you, and that you didn't need that. So feel interested to hear if how you feel about that. Okay.
To expound on that, Edith, our friends from Kane County, for example, stated that having the regional cap will assist them in developing their own. So almost as
Right.
a tool to emulate.
Sure. So let me close out with the last bit of the presentation, which is related to the reporting and tracking. It's very difficult to have any type of, whether a regional climate action plan or a local one, without reporting and tracking progress. So is my screen sharing okay? So just, it's sharing okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So just to go through this really quickly so we end on time, we had really at the start of this wanted to have a Greenest Region Compact reporting and tracking system. It was called a sustainability reporting platform, and we had assistance from the Institute for Sustainable Communities that worked with us to develop a reporting and tracking task force, and many of you were a part of that, and thank you for that. But to help us design a platform and a reporting structure that would capture certifications, recognitions, a lot of things that were just mentioned in the previous conversation, streamline documentation and metrics, and foster regional collaboration. So this was really the precursor to the greenest to the regional cap, if you will. And through that exercise, we expressed the values for the cap as having not only regional scale value where we could report and measure progress, but that there would be feedback immediately to the community, both to drive community progress, to engage with the community, to tell them where you're at as a community leader. Going through this quickly here. So some of you have heard me talk about some of the models that are out there for platforms. And if you hear us talk about the Greenest Region Compact, we're the largest regional sustainability collaborative for municipalities. The largest statewide one is Sustainable Jersey. There are more than 400 communities now that are part of Sustainable Jersey, and their platform has recognition for communities, allows for reporting of certain actions, does not yet do capture metrics across the region, but this remains a very, very good model for future reporting platform for us. Minnesota Green Steps, I'm sorry, this is the Sustainable Jersey one. And just to the point on the community scale, so you can look up your individual community, or you can turn around and say, show me all the Soul Smart communities in our region. And their platform allows that level of engagement. It's basically a snapshot or a progress report, which would hopefully align with what Jared is planning. Minnesota Green Step Cities, this is another statewide program. It's about 10 years old. It's supported by the State Pollution Control Board that has hundreds of municipalities. I think it's between 200 and 300 municipalities with something that looks like our Greenest Region Compact framework. There are recommended best practices, and they are starting to capture metrics at the community scale and aggregate them. And then the role model for collaboration and a reporting platform on adaptation is the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact, which it's a good solid collaboration of communities really gathered to work together on climate adaptation that looks specifically at those strategies and actions. And then I wanted to really show this before we wrap up. So those of you that were looking to see where does then have been asking questions about how the GRC aligns with the CAP, there's a lot of similarities there, but they're not directly aligned yet. Oops, pardon me. So picking a strategy here, which is the advanced renewable energy. And the strategy basically, sort of hints at municipal actions that support renewable energy. That's basically our Soul Smart work. Pardon me, I'm having a little screen viewing problems here. The CAP objective then is very, very similar to that. It has a little more details to it. It's basically keep doing that. If you've been working on streamlining codes and policies to accelerate investment and other renewables in your community, that's a great climate action plan strategy. We have more information now about its GHG reduction potential. What we don't yet have are metrics. So what that could look like is for a reporting platform was that we could start to capture some of those certifications. Have you earned Soul Smart? At what level? What specific actions have you done? In other words, have you had a 3-day turnaround time on your permitting? Do you have a solar landing page in your community? And then the metrics could be, this is where it gets really interesting. And right now we have no capacity. How many solar permits have you issued in your community? What is the capacity of those PV or photovoltaic systems? Then could we calculate the greenhouse gas emissions reduced from the new systems, and what is the value of those construction projects for solar? And then maybe equity questions about the number of low income and senior households that have gotten rooftop solar or PV. Okay, and then another one real quickly on our community solar clearinghouse solutions project, and the GRC strategy is improved community access to community solar. And then we took that forward into the CAP. The strategy is procure clean energy for municipal operations, for your own buildings, and then engage the community to choose clean energy through these types of collaborative procurement projects, like the Community Solar Clearinghouse Solutions program that we have. And that could be, again, what are the administrative actions? Have you passed the resolution to engage with the CS2 program and makes community solar accessible to your residents? And how many households, how many public facilities, what's the kilowatt capacity of the community solar subscriptions? What are the cost savings to customers or the emissions reduced? And again, another equity question there. And I'll just close with saying that we did a lot of thought, we did a lot of pre-planning to really be able to move into a GRC-based reporting system that looks at the metrics and actions for sustainability reporting, and that the plan or the platform that we might build would have a user-friendly community side. It would be effective and easy to use for staff side, and shows meaningful reporting both at the regional and local level. So since we are running, oops, we're actually a little bit older, let me just ask a quick question here about this reporting and tracking system. So if you would tell us if you see where the connections might be made across the CAP and the GRC, and would this reporting and tracking system be useful for your community? And then here's the question that we have to ask, because the funding question is, would your community be willing to pay for this type of a reporting and tracking service? And I know that, so we're getting a maybe right away. We don't know how much that would cost, but this would be part of what we'd be building out in the coming months to raise funds for and move forward with this kind of a system. So 8 questions, 8 respondents here.
Is it fair to say, Edith, that depending on those who responded, or in aggregate, the individual cost would be less, or is it that's not a fair?
You know, I don't know. I will say the scale of the the reporting platforms, for example, there are 14 staff people who work for Sustain Jersey.
Right.
You know, and what the capacity that we have right now at the Mayor's Caucus, could we support this without a lot more funding? Probably not. You know, so how enthusiastically will the philanthropic community build this out, and how do we sustain this over time? Most of the other ones are either anchored to a university,
Right.
or a state agency that has dedicated staff people to maintain it. So I am not confident that we could build this out without anybody paying for it. So nobody said yes. Come on, you guys, you hurt my feelings. Nobody wants to pay for the service. I know the question is maybe, but we do have 55% reporting, or 6 people saying yes, the system would definitely, reporting and tracking system would definitely be useful, and 5 or 45% saying maybe, and then nobody wants to pay for it outright, but a few people, 82% would consider it. And I suppose that's also if you get approval for it, and what does it cost and how much do you get out of it? Okay, so I'm going to stop talking. I think those are all of our questions. So we have a couple of announcements, but let's see if there's any more comments or questions. Got new ones in the chat. Feel free to speak up too.
And just so everyone knows, our next meeting is not on the traditional 3rd Tuesday, but it'll be on the 4th Tuesday of September, which is September 28th. And we're going to be talking about adaptation and steps to resilience with none other than Dr. Ned Gardner from our friends at NOAA. So, who we should state was not just a part of the Climate Action Plan launch, but an integral partner in developing the document that we launched. Without Dr. G, as I like to call him, I think for all practical purposes, Edith, I think you'd agree as well, we'd still be pushing forward on that.
We would not have a CAP without Dr. Gardner's collaboration and co-authorship and extraordinary patience and talent. So so we'll give the floor to Ned to really talk in more detail about the steps to resilience.
Right. Anything for the good of the order before we adjourn?
There's some good comments about tracking and reporting
I saw that.
from Dave. It's no way to know if changes occurred. That's useful. And I just add, Jared, if you're still on the call, if you see any potential alignment with the snapshots you're looking at and what we might look for reporting.
There'll definitely be overlap, and I will keep you informed, touch base with you as we work through it.
Good.
Great. And so, sorry to rush here at the end, but thank you for your really good, strong feedback on that one. There is one other announcement, and that is, again, with launch of the CAP, we've gotten some inquiries about our work. And then as you probably know, we've had gotten really interested in building codes and building performance standards. And so we will be sending out an invitation. We're looking for 2 of our partners are looking for partner communities, either to interview or to learn more about the possibility of developing building performance standards, and then longer term developing clean energy codes and inspection processes for new technologies like Energy Plus, or Solar Plus and energy storage. and EVs. So we'll be looking for communities to raise their hand and work with our partners. And that's just no cost, not a long-term thing, just an opportunity to help us advance those really important initiatives.
Very good. Cheryl, anything else before we adjourn?
No, that was all, unless anyone
Fantastic.
has any more comments.
Okay, unless anyone else has anything to contribute. Again, thank you very, very much for your time this morning. We look forward to seeing you on the 28th of September. As has been indicated in the chat and elsewhere, if anyone needs me, my cell phone's been posted in the chat. If anyone needs Edith or Cheryl, or of course, Jared, just reach out, please. So we're here to help.
Kevin, before we adjourn, there is a question, and I don't know the answer to this one. Any perspective on when live MMC Environment Committee meetings might resume?
That's a great question. We're hoping 2040, but I think it boils down to the comfort level of those who want to participate in a live. I have no objection to doing so, of course, but my suspicion is that the moment we choose to host in-person meetings, do we also need to host then the capability of also having those folks joining us virtually as well? That would be my preference. So if folks do want to get together, we also have the capability of having folks join us remotely. Great. If it's exclusively live, I sense we'd probably lose some participants simply because of ease of participation, but I'm obviously open to any and all formats. So, and that came from, who did that came from?
Glenn Gabriel in Westmont.
Yeah.
He was up, Westmont was up next for a live in person.
We can certainly examine it. I mean, I think all of us are probably watching what's happening in the Delta COVID world. And, but again, I defer to the majority. So whatever's best for the group. So we can discuss that certainly. Even in an informal poll, we can broadcast out, Cheryl, right, to folks. So,
Yeah, we could add that to our next email.
okay, cool.
And just because of the importance of some of these poll questions, we might send these out to everybody just to give us some guidance as we move forward in developing the funding proposals to take the CAP to the next step.
Sounds good.
So,
thanks again, everyone. Enjoy your Tuesday. Be safe.
thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.